The first episode of an all-new season of Reverb Generation Climate, which follows two young climate activists on their mission to fight the climate crisis before time runs out.
They grew up witnessing a rapidly changing climate.
I always talked about climate change with my friends at the lunch table. I was like the weird weather kid. We grew up and seen this everywhere. We want to organize and spread the message that this is urgent and this is our time period.
Now this generation is coming of age.
We lived here and it's getting worse. I get lightheadedness and dizziness and it sucks.
The climate crisis makes racial injustice more unjust. It makes poverty more brutal. Our generation is able to make those connections. I think that's what gives us strength.
But can these young activists mobilize the nation?
Every one of us standing here has an opportunity to reject the climate apocalypse.
In what they call a race against time.
That is insane. I kind of wish I could unsee what I saw now.
They're trying to scare people. Children today have this anxiety about a climate crisis.
And you're saying it's unfounded?
It is absolutely unfounded.
It's like you're in a void that no one can hear you. Like you're screaming about something, but no adult is paying attention. These are our lives, this is our future. We are already reaching tipping point, and time is ticking.
And CBSN Originals executive producer Adam Yamaguchi joins me now for more on that documentary. Adam, welcome. Great to have you with us. So why did you find that Gen X is mobilizing so broadly for climate change? What is motivating this generation?
Well, I think as you heard in some of the sound bites that we just played, there's a real sense of urgency. Past generations have always looked at climate change as, say, the number 5 or the number 6 issue on their minds as they approach elections. And what we're seeing and hearing from young people today is that this is one of the top, if not the top issues. Jerome Foster, who is one of the people that we followed in this documentary, first learned about climate change when he was 6 years old. And he remembers at the time that he thought, well, I'm just a child. The adults will take care of this. By the time I'm an adult, things will be relatively under control. And for the next 12 years, he saw that there was a lot of talk and not much action. He's now just turned 18 and ready to vote for the first time, and this is foremost on his mind. And the many other people who are like him, who grew up hearing about climate change and seeing the impacts for themselves.
Adam, I'm glad you brought up voting because obviously we're on the cusp of an election. What does all of this mean for the upcoming election, do you think? Were most of the people you interviewed for the documentary of voting age?
Yeah, so the two main young activists that we followed, as I mentioned, Jerome just turned 18 earlier this year. We also followed another activist, Miguel Escoto, in El Paso, Texas, who's 23 years old. So yes, they are taking their concerns about the environment and the climate crisis to the polls. And, I think what is, I guess, the million-dollar question in all of this is, they represent perhaps the most unreliable of voting blocs. Young people typically, they may express their concerns, but they may not necessarily go to the polls. But indications are that young people are far more energized and mobilized to actually getting out to vote in this election, and climate issues are really top of mind for them. We're coming off the 2018 midterm elections, which saw record levels of participation, particularly amongst young people. And so I think pollsters will point to the fact that they are expecting, based on what they're hearing, to see record levels set yet again.
And so, Adam, how have you seen the messaging around climate change evolve over the years? I mean, there were some people that you interviewed in that documentary who still don't seem to think it's that big of a deal.
Sure. I mean, there certainly is still a lot of denial and deflection in certain corners, but the conversation has shifted from one of arguing about whether climate change is actually happening and whether humans have a role in that, to what are we going to do about this? How do we transition our economy to an economy that's predicated on green energy, moving away from fossil fuels? And there's a real sense of again, urgency. When I interviewed Jerome for this documentary, we were talking about the fact that there were multiple named storms, hurricanes swirling in the Gulf of Mexico while parts of California were on fire. These are kids who are growing up watching these images play out on the screen, and what prior generations might have sort of relegated to sci-fi movies, some of this is actually playing out now, and that really does have an impact on the conversation. I think the other interesting thing that we heard quite a bit of in the field was intersectionality, which is the idea that addressing climate issues cannot be divorced from addressing some issues around social justice. Race, gender, social status, and class. These are all things that need to be addressed in tandem in order to combat the climate crisis. And a couple of the activists rightfully pointed out that it is oftentimes communities of color that are most impacted by pollution, access to clean water and air, and ultimately by the ravages of climate change.
Absolutely true and very interesting. All right, well, Adam Yamaguchi, thank you so much for joining us and great work with Generation Climate.
Thank you, Tanya.